Yeah. Sorry, I have to click continue, because it asks it's being recorded and to give permission. Sorry for that. You know how it is online, yeah. So yeah, I was just saying, it's just so amazing, your, the inner spirit and inner strength of the people of Palestine, which is why we thought it's important that, we have this session as well. And also, as many have said, the youth is actually the future of the country, and to hear that you are doing so much, I'm moved, to hear the story. I'm just wondering, in terms of the vision, that the youth have for Palestine, what is the solution, and what is your vision of the solution for the liberation of Palestine? The youth vision.
Okay, so I think that the hope that we have as Palestinians, we have hope that Palestine is going to be liberated eventually, no matter how long it takes. We know that one day Palestine is going to be liberated, and that one day it's going to be ours again. I know it's ours now. I know it's always been, but I mean, it won't be occupied anymore. I think that in the last aggression, the Palestinian people in the Gaza Strip have actually been able to see the difference that the work of the youth is doing for the Palestinian cause. Alhamdulillah, we were able to raise so much more awareness than any other year before. Alhamdulillah, we've been able to, let me say, not let the momentum die. Even after the aggression ended, even after the war ended, people are still posting, people are still working for Palestine and for the Palestinians, alhamdulillah. And I can say that so many people are now actually starting to search, to educate themselves about what's happening in Palestine. And they are finally becoming pro-Palestine because they see the facts. The Israeli occupation has been trying to deceive the world for so many years. Since the aggression and the occupation started on Palestine, they've been trying their best to lie to the world so that the world would believe them and think the Palestinians are terrorists, as they keep saying. But alhamdulillah, because of social media and because of the work that the Palestinians have been putting on in the last aggression and on the attacks that were happening in Sheikh Jarrah and Jerusalem, we are able to show the world what's going on. And therefore, people outside of Palestine internationally have been making protests, have been going on protests in front of the embassy and in front of to stand in front of their governments and tell them that they have to do something about what's going on in Palestine. I believe that resistance is our way out. The longer we resist, the weaker they become. So I believe that the resistance is one of the most important things, whether it is military resistance, because we have the right to protect ourselves, and let me say social media and media resistance, because there is a media war as well. Instagram, Facebook, Twitter have been trying to censor the Palestinian content on all of these platforms. So it's not only military resistance on ground, but it's also media resistance and social media resistance, because we need that as well. I believe that the Palestinians alone could do a lot of things, but it's very important to get the support and the help of other people internationally as well. It's very important to bring the governments to see the crimes that they're actually supporting. Many governments, like the government in the US, that let me say, what's it called? Just a second, I'll search the word up because I keep forgetting. The taxes.
It's okay.
The taxes. The tax money that they pay, that the citizens in the US pay, is actually going to support the military system in Israel, in the so-called Israel state. So it's very important to first educate the people that some of the things they do without realizing is actually helping the Israeli occupation. And second, to bring their attention to this topic so that they can stand in front of their governments and tell them, hey, we see what you're doing and we don't accept it. So you have to change. This is very important because the pressure that other countries put on the Israeli occupation actually impacts the situation in Palestine in a very, very big way. So these are my thoughts regarding that.
Thanks so much, Afas, and I think it's thanks to the resilience and also the fighting spirit of the Palestinian that the momentum is growing, day by day. I know you have an exam soon, so I also don't want to take too much of your time, unless, if our co-moderator, Dr. Said, if you have one extra question to pose to Afas. Otherwise, we'll let you go, because we want you to, pass your exam with flying colors as well. But thanks so much from the depth of our heart for being here.
Thank you.
So yeah,
okay. So
before
yes?
we proceed to the next panelist, can I just launch 2 polls for our participants? Just a quick one, just will take a few minutes.
Please, Dr. Syed.
So yeah, can you guys see? There are 2 questions.
Yeah.
So the first question, but panelists cannot answer these questions. This is only for the participants. So participants, please answer on the poll. I'll open for 1 minute. The first question is, Palestine is a land of either Jews or Muslim. The issue is matter of neighboring fights between Arab Muslim and Jewish neighbors. So which one is the answer? You say it's yes, it's just between Arab Muslim and Jews, or no, it's a humanitarian issue, transcends race, religion, and national boundaries. And the second question is the one that is a bit interesting, at least for me, 2-state or 1-state solution. So the first answer is 2-state is the only best way forward. And the second answer is 2-state solution is that the only way forward was to push for a 1-state solution. So let's see which one is interesting. I think let's open the answer for a bit more. I think let's give another 30 seconds probably. In the meantime, Swayan, you want to introduce our next speaker before we end the poll? Okay, I'm waiting for at least 60% of the participants to answer the poll, and then we'll stop.
Okay, so until
if all could answer the poll.
Yeah, until people answer the poll, I would like to thank you so much for having me. I have to run to my exams right now, but thank you so much for having me, and thank you for supporting and showing solidarity to the Palestinian people. And I hope to keep in touch, and I hope to see you all in Palestine once it's liberated. Thank you so much for having me.
Thank you, Afaf. Thank you, Afaf. Thank you for being with us. It's a pleasure to be with you. Inshallah, we'll be with you. We'll pray together, inshallah. Okay, I think that's it. Let's end the poll now. So can you, okay, I'll share the results. So if you can see the result, obviously the first question is 100% answering no, it's a humanitarian issue. So every one of our participants understands that this is an issue that transcends race, religion, and national boundaries. And the second question is a mix. 50% saying 2-state and 50% saying 1-state. So it's gonna be interesting. Okay, all right. I'll leave the to Dr. Swayan to continue. Dr. Swayan can continue with the session.
Panel, Prof. Oh, okay. I think maybe those who are not speaking. Oh, okay, can. Yeah, now we will continue with Prof. Ilan Pape. Prof. Ilan Pape is currently the Professor of History, Director of the European Center for Palestine Studies, University of Exeter, UK. He obtained his BA degree from the Hebrew University in Jerusalem in 1979 and the Doctorate of Philosophy from the University of Oxford in 1984. He founded and directed the Academic Institute for Peace in Givat Haviva, Israel between 1992 to 2000, and was the chair of the Emil Tumar Institute for Palestine Studies in Haifa between 2000 and 2006. And before that, he was also a senior lecturer in the Department of Middle Eastern History and the Department of Political Science in Haifa University, Israel between 1984 and 2006. He also has held other position before, but what we wanted to focus is also is, he's actually a very renowned historian on Israeli, and he has published 20 books and many articles on the history of the Middle East in general and Palestine in particular. Some of his renowned work are A History of Modern Palestine, One Land, Two Peoples, The Ethnic Cleansing of Palestine, and On Palestine, together with Noam Chomsky in 2014. His most recent book is The Biggest Prison on Earth, A History of the Israeli Occupation. He's not only a renowned Israeli historian, but he's also very courageous because he lost his position in Haifa, in Haifa precisely because of his work on Palestine. And yet he's very gracious to say that, his suffering is actually much less than what the Palestinians have to go through. Yeah. Here's my first question to Prof. Ilan Pape. Prof. Ilan, thank you for being here with us. We are most honored, to have you. And you have described the ongoing conflict in Israel and in Palestine as due to the settler colonial project of Zionism. Can you please elaborate on this?
Yes. First of all, thank you for having me with this fantastic panel. And I was also, like all of you, very moved by Afaf testimony. And like all of you, I wish her the best of luck in her exams. Can you hear me?
Very clearly, Prof. Clearly.
Very clearly. Okay, great. Because I'm in a peculiar place in the countryside, so I was not sure that you will be able to hear me.
Just a suggestion. Wondering if it helps if if I can't hear you.
Sorry.
We can't. I think I'm wondering if say that still continue to be technical problem, maybe you can try to off your camera, off the video, because usually without the video in general it can be more stable.
But if you hear me well, I can hear you well. Can you hear me well?
Yeah, we can hear you very well. I think
yes, I can hear you very well.
Very clear.
Very well. Okay, so let's continue. Sorry, forget about my technical remark. Anyway, I would like to answer your question. Yes, already in the 1950s and 1960s, Palestinian scholars and anti-Zionist scholars noted that Zionism was very much keen to other movements of colonialism that came from the West and colonized parts of the non-Western world, like the white settlers who came to North America, the white settlers who came to South Africa, Algeria, Australia, New Zealand. And it was a particular kind of colonialism, a bit different from the one that the British Empire, for instance, exercised in places such as India and Africa, or in Southeast Asia, especially in Malaysia and Indonesia, where other European colonial powers had empires. Settler colonialism was a movement of Europeans who felt, rightly or wrongly, insecure in Europe. In the case of some of the Jews who came to Palestine, they definitely were right to feel insecure in Europe, given what happened to the Jews later on in the Second World War. And they were looking for a safe haven, first of all, out of a continent that didn't want them. The problem was that, like all settler colonial movements, they were looking for a place that was already inhabited by indigenous native people. And they were motivated by a logic that the late scholar of settler colonialism, Patrick Wolfe, called the logic of the elimination of the native. So we have here a clear DNA for the Zionist movement, which in recent years, research even more than ever before clearly articulated, clearly explained to us the connection between Zionism as a settler colonial ideology, not just as a settler colonial movement, and all the actions that the Zionist movement until 1948 and the State of Israel since 1948 took against the Palestinians wherever they were. This idea that you can only create a safe haven for Jews who were running away from Europe or immigrated from Europe, that the only way you can do it is by replacing the indigenous native people and displacing them. This was at the basis of the Zionist movement actions and policies from the very beginning. They arrived in Palestine in 1882 as a very small group of settlers, and of course did not have the power as yet to implement this project of displacement and replacement. But they were very much encouraged in 1917 when the British Empire supported their idea of creating a Jewish homeland in Palestine, and even more so when Britain became the ruler of Palestine between 1918 to 1948. So they were able to build the military, political, and economic capacity to implement this project of displacement and replacement once the British mandate ended, and then they implemented the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. I think in 1948, what the Palestinians called the Nakba, the catastrophe. I think what is important, and this is something Palestinians recognize when they don't talk just about the Nakba, they talk about the Nakba al-Mustamirra, the ongoing Nakba, is that the fact that this project of displacement and replacement, or this project of ethnic cleansing, was legitimized by the international community, gave the state of Israel the power and the support and the encouragement to continue and try and complete what they were unable to fully and successfully achieve in 1948. They ethnically cleansed half of Palestine's population. They took over 78% of historical Palestine, but yet a large number of Palestinians were still in historical Palestine. In the refugee camp of the Palestinian diaspora, the national movement re-awoke, and the Palestinians' resistance and steadfastness meant that the project of displacement and replacement is incomplete. And every Israeli action, from the most miniature one, the most minimal one, on a daily basis, targeting one person in Palestine, or a mega operation targeting tens of thousands or hundreds of thousands of Palestinians, or even millions of Palestinians. It doesn't matter whether you're talking about targeting one person or targeting half of the nation, is motivated by this project of displacement and replacement. And there are only two options. Either they will be able to complete their project, or the world and the Palestinians will be able to stop this project and replace it by a humane, democratic solution, rather than a full implementation of the settler colonial vision of de-Arabizing Palestine altogether, the whole of historical Palestine, and creating instead of it a Jewish state. We cannot hear you.
Dr. Swat, yeah, we cannot hear you.
Yeah, sorry, my apologies. Yeah. Okay, if later there's a connection problem, I found out that it's it's on my side, I will actually off my video. But in any case, yeah, you mentioned also just now the one-state solution, so in terms of being a solution. I'm just wondering also just now when we look at the poll, right? I think among here, probably the audiences are more the converted ones, I would say, yeah, those who come, because 100% say it's a humanitarian issue, whereby people that we meet, on the street and whatnot that we have spoken to may not see it as such, typically, sometimes. So yeah, I'm just wondering, in terms of the one-state solution, how do you think, what are the strategy to popularize it, given that, there's more international support for the two-state solution, so to speak. But for you, it has not been working. Why don't we try something new, right? Yeah, how can we popularize it further so that there are more acceptance, especially given that in Israel also, we find that it's more, it's moving more and more towards right-wing, as I've seen, in some of your talks and whatnot.
Yeah, thank you. First of all, I think we should understand that any alternative solution to the two-state solution, which I think so many people around the world understand is not working, and maybe was flawed from the very beginning, because partition is a solution usually a colonialist power offers the colonized. Very few national liberation movements offer to partition their homeland with a settler movement or a colonial power. To begin with, this is not, when you talk about the two-state solution, you have to remember that you talk about partitioning the Palestinian homeland, and you have to ask yourself whether this is a basis for reconciliation and peace with a settler colonial movement that has been there for more than a century. Secondly, almost all the dominant peace initiatives that were based on a two-state solution were not Palestinian initiatives. Palestinians reacted most of the time, not always, but most of the time, these were peace initiatives cooked in Tel Aviv and Washington and presented as a dish to the Palestinians to take it or leave it. In fact, there were even no proper negotiations of the vision of a two states as Israel understood it at the time, with American support. So it's not surprising that the attempt in the last 50 years or so to offer it as a genuine solution have totally failed. So it's very clear that the next stage has to be, first of all, a Palestinian initiative, not an Israeli initiative, not a Zionist initiative, not an American initiative. We need a clear Palestinian vision for the future. Now, unfortunately, there are political debates, or maybe not unfortunately, maybe it's even natural, that the Palestinian political scene is divided by different ideological approaches, by different ideas of what is the vision for the future. But I think that the younger generation of Palestinians, that's my hope, and it's also my belief, that they will be able to do what this generation finds a bit difficult to do, which is to present a unified Palestinian vision for the future. And I have a good feeling that this vision would be a one-state vision and not a two-state vision. And then I think the international community, the anti-Zionist forces inside Israel would be able to follow it and to support it if it would be led by Palestinians as a vision for the future. There is already a lot of support for the idea of one state among young Palestinians, wherever they are, among the international solidarity movement that supports the Palestinians. In fact, you have to be 10 minutes on the ground to understand that we already experience a one-state solution that is an apartheid state, and that the only solution is to decolonize this apartheid state, to dismantle it and to replace it by something much better. And this is why I think that many of us are now involved in an initiative to encourage a discussion of a one-state solution on a model that would be accepted to as many Palestinians as possible, Palestinians, articulated by Palestinians, and in which the Palestinian democratic leadership, whoever they will be, will also tell I think there are about 6.5 million Jews now in historical Palestine, that will tell this 6.5 million Jews how do they envision their place, the future one-state solution. Rather than all hearing what Israel offers the Palestinians, we need to hear what the Palestinians offer the Jews, who some of them are third-generation settlers, some of them have just arrived in the last 5 years or 6 years. So these are questions for the Palestinian national movement to consider, to articulate. But I think that from what I hear and what I read and what I talk with people, I don't think that the vision includes a two-state solution anymore. I think it will be a one-state solution, which is the most reasonable solution also to my mind, given the history, the ideological problems with Zionism, and the reality on the ground.
Yeah, you mentioned the importance of having unity, one vision among the leadership, and that there's ideological differences. So how do we, how is it possible to bridge the differences, between Fatah and Hamas, right? The two main dominant political governance in Palestine.
Well, first of all, we have to remember that one of the problems that the two-state solution created, it conveyed the misconception that the Palestinians are only the people who live in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. And he totally ignored the Palestinians who live in Israel, and not to mention the 5.5 million Palestinian refugees. So not everything in Palestine, or not everything concerning the Palestinians is about the Hamas and Fatah. You cannot reduce the Palestinians to only those who live in the occupied West Bank or the besieged Gaza Strip, and you cannot reduce Palestine to 22% of the homeland that is the West Bank and the Gaza Strip. So if you take the whole Palestinian community together, there are two facts which are interesting. One is it's the youngest society in the world. It is the youngest society in the world. So we have to listen to the young people. I think that we saw it in the Arab Spring. I don't think that party affiliations, political affiliations of this kind are of particular interest for them. I think it's much more about human rights and civil rights and collective rights, proud of their heritage, proud of their identity, their connection to the Arab world, the connection to the Muslim world. I think all this would come into play when they will eventually articulate a vision for us. And the second point is that, of course, it's sometimes misleading to say that the Palestinians are not united. Maybe politicians are not united, but I think, I listened a lot to conversations between Palestinians in Haifa, Gaza, Nablus, Yarmouk, and Hilwe, Detroit, London, Kuala Lumpur. And when they talk about who they are, what are they hoping for, what have their families suffered, I see a lot of unity. I don't see any disunity. I think the experience of being colonized, of being affected by the settler colonialism of Zionism creates a certain unity. Politicians sometimes tend to forget that kind of unity for various reasons. But I think that we should remember that there is a unity, there is a Palestinian unity of a kind. It is not reflected as yet because of the political fragmentation, because of the occupation, and this is a process. We have to be patient. I'm very optimistic about this process. The question is, will the world respond to its responsibility to be by the side of the Palestinians, because the imbalance, the military imbalance, the political imbalance, the economic imbalance on the ground is such that you need an outside world and a regional world to help the Palestinians to achieve their freedom and liberation.
Yeah, I just have one last question to follow up from the point you made, right? One of the reasons that's been given as to why, people are not supporting the Palestinian cause is that, Hamas, organization like Hamas, is seen or, has been actually recently after the most recent attack, right? Yeah, the Organization of American States, and it's an international coalition of 35 countries in North and South America, right? It designated Hamas a terrorist organization since it has launched attacks against the Israeli civilian population as well. So, and oftentimes when we hear conversation about that, the issue is raised as well. They will say, Palestinian, they also attack the civilian population, so therefore they are a terrorist organization. How do we counter that? What do you think of that framing? Do you think it's a fair, fair way to, to depict it?
Mm-hmm. Well, first of all, it's not new. When the Palestinian movement was led by groups of the left or groups of the center, like the Fatah or the PFLP, of the PDFLP, whoever was leading the Palestinian resistance, they were depicted as terrorists rather than as a liberation movement. And this was part of the success of the Israeli propaganda machine to kind of terrorize, if you want, the legitimate Palestinian struggle for liberation and freedom. So we should remember there's nothing new by now applying it to the Hamas. I think that if you talk with people with a modicum of decency in them, or with people who follow the events and know a little bit about what goes on, I don't think they can frame the struggle in Palestine in any other way than as a struggle between an anti-colonialist movement of liberation and a colonial settler or settler colonial state. The means that the resistance or liberation movement is using change from time to time, depending on what they feel they are facing from the settler colonial state. An armed struggle was part of liberation movements which were hailed in the West in the past when they fought against imperialism and colonialism in Africa, in Southeast Asia, and South America. So I think this is, if people still depict the Hamas as a terrorist organization and do not frame the state of Israel as they should frame it, as an apartheid settler colonial state, then it means that either they are cynically buying into the Israeli framing because they have some interests, or they are ignorant. I tend to think that most people are not ignorant anymore, so I go for the first option. What is very interesting to note that for the first time we have organizations which are at heart were liberal Zionists, both inside Israel, like the human rights organization B'Tselem, and in America, Human Rights Watch. For the first time, these very important organizations accept the genuine and right framing of Israel as an apartheid settler colonial state. They didn't go as far as to think, what does this mean when you talk about the Hamas or any Palestinian resistance? But you can easily infer from that whoever is struggling on the Palestinian side is struggling against an apartheid and settler colonial state. And if you go back to the struggle of the ANC in apartheid South Africa and so on, there should be a tactical discussion of the value, of the benefit of an armed struggle, a more popular struggle, and so on. But this discussion cannot in any way delegitimize the right of the Palestinians to struggle for liberation, self-determination, and to defend themselves from what I said at the very beginning, from a settler colonial state that has not yet completed the project of displacement and replacement through ethnic cleansing operations. So I think we should always ask people to begin with what other Palestinians are facing, rather than the question of how do we depict their struggle against what they're facing. If you don't start with the question, what other Palestinians are facing, you may run into these kinds of misrepresentation of who the Palestinians are, what is the nature of the struggle, and is this struggle legitimate or not?
Thank you so much, Prof. Ilan. In fact, I can't agree more with you. Malaysia also, we were colonized before, and there were freedom fighters here as well. Yeah, right. But but it's also very important to address, because there are those who still believe that, which is why we wanted also to hear from you, since you are the world-renowned historian on that topic. Yeah, thank you so much. Now I'll pass over to Dr. Said Khalid, who will moderate the other half. Okay, Dr. Said, please, over to you.
Thank you, Dr. Swatyan. Okay, so our next panelist is Dr. Azzam Tamimi. So Dr. Azzam Tamimi is a British Palestinian writer, analyst, and commentator. He obtained his doctorate in political philosophy from the University of Westminster in London, and he was the director of the London-based Institute of Islamic Political Thought. And until 2004, he worked as a senior lecturer at the Markfield Institute of Higher Education in Leicester, UK. And then he was a visiting professor at Kyoto and Nagoya universities in Japan. So from July 2006, he co-founded a London-based Al-Hiwar Arabic satellite TV channel. And his most recent book was Hamas, Unwritten Chapters, was published by Hearst London in 2006. And he wrote many other books, such as Power Sharing in Islam, Islam and Secularism in the Middle East. And among the book that I've read and actually made me interested to know more about Dr. Azam is Rashid Ghannouchi, a Democrat within Islamism in 2001. So I think Dr. Azam is as a Palestinian as well, and he is one of the foremost speaker in terms of this issue. Okay, I have few questions for Dr. Azam. So the first one is, in an article in 2018, Dr. Azam mentioned about US deal of the century and the relocation of US embassy to Jerusalem. So US until now continues to funnel millions and billions of US dollars into Israel. So this special relationship seemed to be continued in Biden's administration. So how do you think US's influence will disrupt the peace process and increase Palestinian suffering further? And do you think the Palestinians will continue to struggle, or will they be better under Biden administration? So that's the first question that I would like to ask Dr. Azam.
Well, thank you very much, and I'm grateful to you for inviting me, and I'm honored to be with such an esteemed panel. Thank you very much. You see, for me as a Palestinian, it's not really a big issue where the US embassy is set up in Palestine. I know that people made a fuss about this when the embassy was moved from Tel Aviv to Jerusalem. It was an act of symbolism, but for me, Tel Aviv and Jerusalem, Hebron, Jaffa, Haifa, Safad, Be'er Saba, where my mother was born, are all Palestine. So that's not really the issue. Second, the deal of the century was actually about legitimizing the status quo and not creating a new one, because much of what Trump was talking about in his peace plan had already been achieved on the ground, had already been accomplished by successive Israeli governments, especially since Oslo. Actually, there has been more colonization since Oslo than before. More confiscation of land, more expansion of settlements, more demolitions, you name it. Now, the United States of America is undergoing a change, definitely. I recognize that, but it hasn't yet reached the decision-making circles. But it is promising in a sense that civil society, political aspects of political society, people are talking about things. There was a brilliant article by a Harvard scholar in foreign policy about the necessity that the United States of America change its special relationship with Israel to a normal relationship. I mean, that's something probably very few people dared talk about before. Some House of Representative members, some Senate members are voicing their anger toward what Israel is doing. So there is something going on. But of course, at the official level, Biden is as Zionist as any previous president. So nothing much has changed, but I'm optimistic that time is on our side rather than on the side of the Zionists. Now, the Palestinians will not wait for the US to change its position. They've been struggling, they will continue to struggle. I've been inside Palestine, I would have been involved probably actively than just politically, or my children and my grandchildren, although they're born and raised outside Palestine, they're so attached to Palestine and the issue. We have no other more important issue than this. We will continue the struggle. But of course, it is our struggle that will impose a change on others, just like what happened in South Africa. I was listening to the South African president the other day. I think he was interviewed by a Belgian TV channel, if I'm not mistaken. And he even referred to armed struggle as a means used by the South African people. Because, you see, forget about whatever anybody says. If your home is occupied, if you are invaded, if your rights are denied, sweet words won't help you regain any of this nonsense. I mean, the Palestinians, even some of the Palestinians tried this. And that's the reason we have Hamas today, because Fatah thought by going through Oslo, they might be able to achieve something. They are in a much worse situation than before. And they are no longer the national liberation movement that the Palestinians recognized at one time. So even if Hamas were to change tomorrow and become like Fatah, there will be another project because the struggle will continue. So it is the struggle of the Palestinians, their steadfastness, that will force a change on America, on Western Europe, anywhere in the world. And I still remember immediately after the victory Hamas accomplished in the 2006 elections, I had a discussion with a senior minister in a European government. And he said to me that his government was considering talking to Hamas because now there is a new reality. But of course, there was the three conditions of the quartet and all this nonsense that excluded Hamas until and unless it accepted Israel's right to exist, etc. So nothing, and there was also a change of heart for a number of reasons. But events on the ground, as we saw in the recent confrontation, are the ones that will force the world to change its position.
Okay, thank you, Dr. Azam. So, quick fire questions. The first one is you wrote a book about Hamas history from within. So, there are suggestions that because Hamas is being in power, albeit elected democratically, but as Hamas being labeled as a terrorist organization by some quarters, is this the reason why the peace process is being delayed? So what is your opinion on that? And I think we would like to hear as well your opinion on the two-state versus one-state solution. Yes.
No, the whole peace process was a plot against Palestine. It's from Madrid onwards. The idea was to contain the Palestinian struggle and finish it off. And this is what they did. And when Yasser Arafat realized his big mistake in 2000, returning from Camp David in America, he decided to turn the table and probably thinking he could pressure the Israelis into giving him something because he promised the people something. They killed him. And they went on rampage. They destroyed his Palestinian Authority. They destroyed almost the entire infrastructure. And then they brought Mahmoud Abbas, who agreed to resume what Yasser Arafat probably thought it was not possible to continue. So forget about the peace process. There hasn't been a peace process. There has been a process with the objective of empowering the occupation. That's it. Whatever people say. Now, the fact that Hamas is labeled as a terrorist, that's a big honor. That's a great honor. Because if you are a national liberation movement and your enemies are calling you a terrorist, that means you are doing the right thing. Nelson Mandela was called a terrorist. Margaret Thatcher said that that man would never be allowed to set foot on British soil. And guess what? He arrived and was given a hero's welcome. And I once gave a speech in Trafalgar Square. And I said, just like Mandela came and set foot on this soil, I'm hoping that one day Sheikh Ahmed Yassin, he was still alive at the time, that Sheikh Ahmed Yassin would come here because he is also a freedom fighter. So it doesn't matter how people label us. Nowadays, you don't have to carry a machine gun to be called a terrorist. Just speak the truth and they call you a terrorist. Or they call courageous Jews who speak against Zionism, they call them self-hating Jews. They have all sorts of labels in their closets. They just bring them out and stick them to you. And if you are going to be disturbed by this or put off, then you might as well just sit home and do nothing. No, it doesn't matter what they call us. It doesn't matter what they label us. On numerous occasions, on BBC, on CNN, and other channels, they would say to me, Or would you denounce the terrorists who are doing this and that to civilian Israelis? I say, I would definitely condemn those who force them to do this. This is what terrorism is about. Terrorism is to force someone out of their home, leave them no option but to resort to violence. Now, who is the terrorist? It's the one who is forcing you to use violence, not yourself, because you've been denied your humanity, you've been denied your livelihood, you've been like in Gaza, under siege, no, you cannot get medicine for your children, you cannot get food for them. It's just a terrible situation. So labeling doesn't frighten us.
Two state, one state, what is your take on that?
One state, two state? Look, I prefer to call it a situation rather than a solution, because that's not a solution. The only solution to any problem is to get rid of the causes of the problem. What is the cause of the problem in Palestine? Well, they took my mother's house. Okay, give my mother back her house. Or my mother is already dead. But I can tell you, sorry about this, someone is trying to call. My mother, until she died, if you ask her what her vision was, she wanted to go back to the house in which she was born and raised until 1948 in Beersheba. Now, my mother was born during the British Mandate. Her father was born during the Ottoman Empire. Our great ancestor, Tamim ad-Dari, was born under the Byzantine Empire. It didn't matter to us who ruled Palestine and whether it was an independent state or a part of an empire. We were still in our houses. We were in our land. We were farming our grapes and our olives, etc. So you see, talking about solutions is, as Professor Elan Pape rightly said, is a colonial sort of arrangement. For me, if, as I explained in my book, had the Israelis agreed to a long-term truce as offered by Sheikh Ahmed Yassin and later on by Hamas leadership, we would have ended up temporarily in a two-state situation. But that would not have been the solution, because the Palestinian refugees around the world want to see justice. And the two-state solution does not provide justice to anyone. Now, is it going to be a one-state solution? I don't know, that's possible. But that again is a situation that comes out of how the conflict is managed. Like in the case of South Africa. In the case of South Africa, the solution was not a single state, as people say, that was the fruit, that was the outcome. The solution was undoing apartheid. Similarly, in Palestine, the solution is undoing Zionism. Once you undo Zionism, we have no problem with the Jews. I personally have no problem with the Jews. I have so many Jewish friends who I see eye with them, and we can recognize that there is justice here, there is oppression here on the basis of our humanity. Muslims, Jews, and Christians lived together for centuries. There was no problem. Zionism created the problem. Zionism is telling its adherents that because you happen to be Jewish, you have the right to come to Azzam Tamimi's mother's house, throw her out, take it from her, and turn it into your own residence, just because you happen to be Jewish. I mean, imagine if a Muslim comes to Britain and says to a British neighbor, oh, God, Allah says to me, this is my house, you must come out. I mean, people would send them to a madhouse, right? Probably Zionists should go to a madhouse, because it just doesn't make sense that because you happen to be Jewish, you are favored in a sense that you can persecute other people. It's not acceptable.
Okay, all right. Thank you, Dr. Azzam. Very interesting answer. I think it's super interesting for me. Okay, our next panelist is someone very close to me as a medical clinician as well. So Dr. Ang Swee Chai. Dr. Ang Swee Chai was born in Penang, Malaysia. She grew up and studied in Singapore, obtained medical degree in 1973. I'm not born yet. And 76 masters in occupational medicine, University of Singapore. She's among the few non-Arab who got the start of Palestine because of what she did in Shabra and Shatila, and she obtained FRCS and completed her orthopedic surgical training in Newcastle upon Tyne in Northeast England. And she is the first female orthopedic consultant in St. Bartholomew and the Royal London Hospitals. So she has very strong involvement in Palestine, especially during the Shabra and Shatila. And as the video that we played before we begin the webinar, she spoke to UN and testified about the atrocities that has happened. Okay, so I have a few questions for Dr. Ang. So the first one is, Dr. Ang, you were a Christian Zionist before and now a Palestinian activist. So you co-founded the charity NGO Medical Aid for Palestine and was even awarded the Star of Palestine. Why and what has driven you to change the cause and fight for the Palestinian cause? So you wrote the book From Beirut to Jerusalem. You described your involvement during Shabra and Shatila murders in 1982. So can you tell us what actually transpired and why do you think this Palestinian issue is not a Palestinian issue? It's a humanitarian issue that transcends religion, race, and racial boundaries. Yes, Dr. Ang.
Thank you, Dr. Said. Yeah, okay. That's a lot of questions asked together. Well, I grew up supporting Israel, okay? And I remember one of the highlights of my young Christian life is when Israel won the 6-day war. And we see it as an act of God. You know, we don't understand what's happening, you see? So I've got no idea that there are people called Palestinians until I actually stepped foot in the Middle East. And it happened in 1982 when, for the first time, we actually saw the scenes of murder and destruction and killing carried on by the Israeli Defense Force on a country called Lebanon. And every night, it was June 1982, and every night I came home, I saw buildings being bombed, children being killed, hospitals being destroyed, and lots of people being made homeless. And as usual, the BBC actually say this is to get rid of the Palestine Liberation Organization, which is the #1 terrorist in the whole world. So I because of the way I was brought up, I hated the PLO. I actually believed that they were terrorists. But as I watch on, I said, this is not destroying terrorists. This is killing innocent people, ordinary people. And of course, my church didn't help because they say, well, you know, you remember in the Old Testament, Joshua, the prophet Joshua, conquered Canaan and how many people were wiped out. But my vision of God is totally different. I believe that God made us. I believe that we are brothers and sisters in the eyes of God. And something inside me told me that God loves the people in Lebanon as much as he loves me and loves you and the Jews. So why this? You see, it went on and on and on. So finally, an appeal came from Christian Aid asking for an orthopedic surgeon to go and treat the wounded, and I've got no choice but to resign from my work and at least do something. Otherwise, I have no peace. And it's only when I actually came to work in Lebanon, then I realized that it is not a question of PLO. It is a question of the Palestinian people. I have not treated a single PLO fighter, but I've come to see the Palestinians as human beings who suffered so much, and nothing about them has been told. They lost their homes, they were refugees, and as refugees in the camps in Lebanon, they're bombed again and again and again. Children were born refugees, they die refugees with no hope. And yet, these people are so wonderful that, you know, you just have to love them. Azam, I'm quite sure you agree. You know, we just have to love the Palestinians, and I begin to really love them. You know, I learned about their culture, what their aspirations are, and that all they want is to live like normal human beings with a right to a homeland, with a right to security, a right to freedom, a right to justice, and a right to life. These are very much what we want for ourselves and for our children. Why was it denied them? So shortly after my arrival, the PLO actually evacuated 14,000 of them were put on boats to win a ceasefire so that Lebanon wouldn't be completely destroyed. That was a threat at the time. So now looking back, I realized the evacuation of 14,000 Palestinians is actually breaking up 14,000 families. Because who are the people that were evacuated? They are the men, the fathers, the bread earners, the doctors, the administrator, you know, all the important members of Palestinian society in Lebanon were all put on a boat to go so that the families who have already been destroyed by the 10 weeks of bombardment, of siege and so on, no home, has got nothing to lean on. But yet these families came back to rebuild their lives. And I met them where they are. I sat in their broken homes and learned their stories. I looked at the embroidery, where they tried through the embroidery to remember their villages. And it was really moving and overwhelming. And it was all right. I would have stopped there and we become friends. But unfortunately, 3 weeks after the evacuation, Israel violated the ceasefire and drove in tanks, surrounded Sabra Shatila, and the families who have just returned to pick up their lives were massacred. I was working in Gaza hospital. They were completely defenseless because the PLO has gone. The international peacekeeping force, the American army have all withdrawn, and the camps are sealed, and they sent in their own allies, the Christians, and brutally murdered the Palestinians. So that was a turning point for me. That was how I realized and learned the story of the Palestinians in a very difficult way. And each one of them killed, there are some Lebanese, of course, has on their bodies a refugee identity card saying that they're refugees from Galilee, from Haifa, from Jenin, from all parts of Palestine. So if in life the world refused to listen to the Palestinians, then in death it should. And my hospital was ransacked. I couldn't work, and I decided, yes, the duty of the doctor is not only to mend wounds, we have to prevent it. And also, as a human being, I've witnessed this chapter of Palestinian stories, and it was very painful. I remember standing in front of the mass grave and said, God, why did this happen? What do you want me to do? And I looked back and I thought, I probably made a pledge to God at the time. Please give me the rest of my life to work for and with the Palestinians. Because I've been a Zionist, I've hated them, I've soaked up all the propaganda without investigation. So please let me walk with them and be their friend. So that's how I converted.
Okay, thank you so much, Dr. Ang Swee Chai. And we've seen your video before. I've shared the link. You all can see Dr. Ang's statement to the UN. I think it's very interesting. Actually, I have a few more questions, but because of time, we're going to ask later in the Q&A, inshallah. So I'll pass the floor back to Dr. Lai Swat Yan.
Thank you so much, because Prof. Ilan actually have to leave at 5:30. So I think for Prof. Nazari, we also allocate 10 minutes because later on after Prof. Ilan left, there's still half an hour for Dr. Azam, Prof. Nazari, and also Dr. Ang. Thank you for all your cooperation and we really appreciate it. Anyway, let me introduce Prof. Muhammad Nazari Ismail now. He's currently a professor at the Faculty of Business and Accounting, University Malaya, Kuala Lumpur, Malaysia. He was also a Fulbright Scholar to the University of Michigan at Ann Arbor in 2000 and a Fulbright Visiting Specialist at Pfeiffer University, North Carolina in 2005. He is now the chairman of Palestine Progressive Association Malaysia and also chairman of BDS Malaysia. In 2018, he took part in one of the European Leagues of Freedom flotillas boat to Gaza. Okay. Prof. Nazari, of course, in terms of the community, you're no foreign. We always receive emails and whatnot from BDS of its recent activities, and I'm very thankful to that, and also very appreciative that you could be part of the panel. My first question to you is, you took part in one of the European Legs of Freedom flotillas, but a boat to Gaza that was mentioned in 2018. Share with us the motivation for you to be part of this journey then, and the experiences of the journey itself.
Thank you very much for having me this afternoon. It's to be on the panel with my teachers, Dr. Azam and Professor Ilan Pape. They may not know they are my teachers because I've been reading their books and watching their YouTube clips to understand the issue. So they are actually my professors. Now, regarding the flotilla, Dr. Ang was also on the same boat actually, but she was on the last leg. I was in the earliest leg actually in Europe between Denmark and Germany. So my participation was not as challenging as what Dr. Ang went through. She ended up being arrested by the Israeli Navy, whereas I was able to come back and took a flight from Germany back to Kuala Lumpur. But it was why did I participate in there? It was according to some people, was still very dangerous because you never know what the Israelis could do. They could sink the boat in the earlier stages, and that was possible. When we were in Denmark, in Copenhagen, I remember we had a guard who was making sure that nobody attacked the boat or tried to sink the boat. And you know what? One of the guards, a lady, she told me she was an ex-military officer in the Israeli army. She was an ex-soldier in the Israeli army. And I said, "Why are you doing here?" I said, "I have left. I don't believe in Zionism anymore. I realized what we were doing were all wrong. I was the one who went to the school to talk about Israeli state campaigning the students to join the Israeli army. But now I realize it's all wrong. And I've left them, and now I'm working on the other side now, and I'm making sure that nobody destroys the boat." And she said, I asked her, "Was it easy to change your mind?" Oh, she said it was not very easy at all. It took a lot. It's not easy because of the indoctrination that she went through. She said it was very difficult to change her mind about what was happening. It was a learning experience to me. But why did I take part? Well, simply because I was invited to take part, and there's no way I can say no, because that was a project to educate the world about what was happening in Gaza. People were suffering in Gaza. Nobody cares about that. When we arrived in Germany, there was no coverage in the newspaper at all. Nobody cares in Germany. So we need a lot of effort to make sure people know that the people in Gaza are suffering. But now, of course, we know now because of the recent attack. But the fact that they are now still being blockaded, and that the US and the Europeans are still allowing the Israelis to do this to the Gaza, even though after what has happened recently, the blockade continues and they are still suffering. So we need to continue to do this, to educate people about the injustice that have been done to the Palestinians. And I learned a lot from that trip. One of the things that I learned was how the whole humanity is a struggle based on humanity, and also the people all over the world are supporting it, people who really understand the issue. The participants there was one American ex-CIA official, there was the Jewish lady who was the boat leader, Zohar. She is a Jewish actually, yeah. She is living in Spain. The captain was a Norwegian guy, and the cook was a Swedish guy, and also the co-pilot. There was a representative from the Canadian indigenous people. All of us were in the same boat. All of us together trying to educate the world to know that the Gazans are suffering and that we have to know something about it. And it was really amazing and very motivating to me. Thank you, Dr. Lai, for the question.
You're welcome, Prof. Nazari. Yeah. Another question is, when was boycott, divestment, sanctions Malaysia established, and what are some of its success campaign stories, as well as some of the challenges that you have had?
Thank you. Thank you very much. The BDS Malaysia was established in 2015 by some NGOs, a couple of NGOs in Malaysia, MyCare, Viva Palestina, Al-Quds Foundation, Kikong. We work together with the BDS National Committee, BNC. And basically, as you know, the BDS now, it is interesting. I remember Dr. Azam said just now that, that if you are called a terrorist, then it's a badge of honor. Now I'm wearing the badge of honor because I read in newspaper that the Israelis and the Americans are calling BDS activists to be terrorists. So now I am a terrorist, being part of the BDS group, which is a badge of honor. Okay, so what we do is in Malaysia, it's not so difficult actually because Malaysia is already not having any relationship with Israel. But there are things that we need to do. For example, I just want to highlight here is that the Malaysian government still talk about this two-state solution. So we want to highlight to the Malaysian public and to the Malaysian government to understand that this is not the way ahead. The way ahead is to educate the public about the apartheid nature of Israel. So that is what we should be talking about. And Malaysia should be at the forefront of the effort to convince the international community to label Israel as an apartheid state, and also to call the world to boycott Israel, and also to boycott all organizations that are complicit with Israel. And so far, we are not doing that. In Malaysia, I'm sure some people say they are in Malaysia, but I'm telling you as a Malaysian, I'm not very satisfied because we are still allowing organizations that are complicit with Israel to operate in our country. For example, we have Caterpillar, which is being distributed by Malaysian government-linked companies. We allow G4S, the security company that works together with the Israeli military, that takes care of Israeli prisons and provides security services to the Israeli military. Right? We allow HP to operate here. Many Malaysian government departments buy computer equipment from HP. HP has been designated by the BDS movement to be on top of the list of companies that are complicit with Israel and should be boycotted. So we are not doing that yet. And many Malaysians are still not aware of that. So we have to work harder, but alhamdulillah, there have been some success stories. We managed to stop the import of goods produced by Israeli companies. They were produced in China, but they have been sent from China, but actually they are produced by Israeli company. We managed to stop that. We managed to stop the participation of an Israeli academic in a conference organized by a local university, because the BDS policy is we boycott Israeli institutions. We may not boycott Israeli individuals, but we boycott Israeli institutions. If an academic represents an institution, university, universities in Israel are complicit. They produce weapons, they do research on weapons, etc. And some of them are located in the occupied territories. So we managed to stop the participation of an Israeli academic to stop the university from inviting him. We managed to convince the largest university in Malaysia, UITM, to stop, to terminate its contract with Puma. Puma, as you know, is also one of our targets because Puma is the main sponsor of the Israeli football association, and so they are complicit as well. And we managed to get almost up to now almost 100 organizations now to pledge not to buy HP products. And we need to work harder to make sure that people understand this. That they need to boycott HP because HP is really active in helping Israel to commit human rights violations against the Palestinians. Okay.
Thank you so much, Prof. Nazari, for the amazing work. We hope more and more consumers would also be more discerning. Yeah. Okay. I think because we have 7 minutes more before Prof. Ilan is due to leave, so that's why we will just prioritize, pass him some questions that the audiences have asked. I have at least two here. One is, what are your? This is from Dr. Chan Chi Kun. He asked, what are your thoughts on China's recent overtures to mediate between Palestine and Tel Aviv? That's the first.
About China's ideas. Well, it's hard to say. First of all, any involvement which is not an American involvement is welcome to begin with. I mean, for too long, the whole international dimension of the attempts to mediate consequences. But I know that a moment in time it would be more helpful. I mean, it would be interesting to see and hear what they have to offer. So I wouldn't cancel it, you know, on the spot. But I think, as far as I understand, and I'm not an expert on Chinese foreign policy, I think there is a very strong underlying economic basis for the Chinese policy in the Middle East, and also in the case of Palestine itself. And at this moment in time, if you are driven by economic motivation, you might not be very helpful in dealing with the situation we all talked about, which is the need to push forward the process of decolonization and de-Zionization of Palestine. I don't think China at this moment in time is willing to push forward for such a change, a drastic change or a dramatic change on the ground. Of course, there is the old Chinese position of the 1950s and the 1960s, which identified with the anti-colonialist struggle of the Palestinians, and the Palestinian left, at least, identified very strongly with some of the Maoist and Marxist-Leninist ideas. But I think China today doesn't offer yet a new paradigm, which is that different. But as I say, at least it would be interesting for once to listen to ideas that do not flow directly from Washington. But I don't think that this is the big news of the day, if you want. But as I say, of course, everyone is welcome to offer help, and provided they understand what is the issue and are not mesmerized or misinformed about its origins, its nature, and the basic steps that needs to be taken.
Prof. Ilan, here's a question from Fatima Idris. She's asking, what is the ordinary Israeli Jews' view, stance on a one-state solution?
Yes, a good question. Well, the vast majority of the Jewish electorate in Israel is not interested in two-state solution and not interested in one-state solution. They're interested in retaining the status quo. And I think, as Dr. Tamimi rightly said, this is the major message that they get from the Americans, whether it's Trump or Biden. And this is reassuring for them, that nobody will force them, so they hope, to change the status quo. And therefore, most of them regard the West Bank as a place that Israel manages quite efficiently. They are worried about the Hamas resistance in Gaza, but they don't think in terms of reconciliation or decolonization, or even one state or two states. They really believe that they have the power and the network, the global network, to continue the status quo as it is. Maybe some of them, like the new prime minister, still hopes to officially annex Area C, which is 60% of the West Bank, to Israel. But again, I think we should understand that these are not the important issues, because whether they annex Area C or they don't annex Area C, what is important is that they continue to ethnically cleanse Area C. I think that's the issue. They're ethnically cleansing the Jordan Valley. They're ethnically cleansing Masaf Iriata, the southern area of Halil. They have already ethnically cleansed the heart of the old city in Halil, Hebron. They ethnically cleansed the Palestinians in the south, in the Nakab. They're strangulating the Palestinians who live in the Galilee. So I think these are the most important issues, and we have to recognize the vast majority of Israeli Jews stand behind these policies. They're not against them. And therefore, ideas such as the BDS are important. The idea is that you need the pressure, you need the resistance, because these people will not change their mind just because they'll have a nice debate with us. They would have to be forced to change their mentality and perception. And, you know, like the whites of South Africa, they didn't forsake apartheid because someone sent them a good article about the wrongs and evils of apartheid. They left apartheid because of the success of the ANC from the inside and the regime of sanctions from the outside. That's otherwise they would have continued with apartheid. Nobody would have convinced them that there is something morally wrong with it. So I think we should understand what we are facing and not wait for a change from within the Israeli Jewish society. A change in the Jewish society in historical Palestine is an outcome of a successful liberation, decolonization, is not a precondition for liberation, decolonization. I think that's very important to remember. And it's not our main concern. Our main concern is really how to bring it about, despite the fact that the vast majority of them would try to object to this.
Prof. Ilan, can I ask you your indulgence to answer one last question?
Yes, of course.
I know you have to leave at 5:30.
Yes,
okay, thank you so much. Yeah, and we can't agree more with you on the importance of international pressure, right? And that's a question pertaining to the role of Jordan and Saudi Arabia. This is from Kalman Azman, right? He's asking, what is the role of Jordan and Saudi Arabia in this current climate, you know, in Palestine and the Zionist occupier? If you could speak a bit about that as well.
Yeah, well, I think generally we all understand that certain regimes, quite a few regimes in the Arab world today, tend to think that they can reach an understanding. In the case of Jordan, an official understanding, that is official bilateral diplomatic relations. In the case of Saudi Arabia, and tacit informal relations, but there's not much of a difference with Israel as a best means of safeguarding their own regimes, and probably more importantly, from their point of view, as a way of establishing stronger ties with the United States. Maybe in the case of Saudi Arabia, there is a fear of Iran, but I think that's a bit inflated by the Saudis to justify policies inside Saudi Arabia and the connection with America, rather than a genuine fear. This is part of an old story, beginning with the arrival of Zionism in Palestine, and which, as you know, coincided with liberation movements in the Arab world, which eventually decolonized much of the Arab world. The post-colonial Arab states should be seen as made of, like any other normal society, of political elites and the civil society, so to speak. And I think also even in Jordan and Saudi Arabia today, the civil society of this generation, like the civil society of the previous generation, understand the importance of the liberation of Palestine, connect the liberation of Palestine to the future of the Arab world as a whole, and the same enthusiasm that led the young Arabs to volunteer to struggle with the Palestinians in the 1936 uprising is there today, and we saw it in the Arab Spring, wherever it was possible to demonstrate. The Arab regimes have a different story and a different history, and not always willing to reflect what their societies want them to do with regard to Palestine. And I think in this respect, this is what kind of characterizes Jordan and Saudi Arabia. The case of the Jordanians really deserves probably a longer answer, but which I don't have time for. The whole Hashemite story of arriving in the eastern part of the Jordan River in 1921, and with the help of the British becoming an Arab state, with a royal house that had established quite good connection with the Zionist leadership before 48, had a tacit understanding before the 48 events and so on. A very complex relationship with the Palestinians, with a large Palestinian society in it. I do think that when we always understood it, that the decolonization of Palestine, the designation of Palestine, would have a very positive effect on the Arab world. There's no doubt about it. In terms of making the Arab world a better place to live in, with a better future. And the Arab regimes that are willing to go along with Israel probably don't want this change to happen. Therefore, this will be part of the same problem, and they're interconnected. Thank you. And I do apologize that I have to leave you for another webinar, but I really enjoyed it, and thank you so much for having me. This is very important, especially for Southeast Asia. I feel that we are talking all the time to the West, and we should talk to the rest of the world, which is as important, if not more, in our struggle for freedom, justice, and liberation in Palestine. And thank you very much.
Prof. Ilan, on behalf of the organizing committee, we also like to express our gratitude and also gratitude for your insightful contribution and comments on the situation in Palestine. Thank you so much, and we hope
you very much.
You would
thank you.
Back, yeah,
and all the best.
You would actually come back again, since there's still so much to to explore and talk about.
Of course.
Thank you.
I will. Again. Thank you. Thank you.
Okay, before we proceed, we have lots of questions actually, but I'm going to allow one of our participants who's been asking most of the question, and I think it will be interesting if we were to allow, Mr. Joseph O'Neill to actually speak.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes, very clearly.
Thank you. Fantastic meeting. Really pleased, and top marks to Malaya. I'm a chair of an interfaith for Palestine group in the UK. We meet weekly to discuss Palestine, and we pray individually for it, are mindful. The key issue, I mean, I've asked a lot of questions, and a lot of the questions, as you know, are often comments in themselves. But the key word that is coming up in our group, and that is the sort of theme for this year's meetings, is genocide. I'm an educated person, I'm a retired doctor. I've explored the issue of genocide. I have bought the book by the Jewish lawyer Raphael Lemkin, and I've looked at it in careful detail and come to the conclusion, as many of our group have, that what is happening to the Palestinians is a genocide. If you look at your chat box, I put in a quote from at 10:01 a.m. from Raphael Lemkin, the Jewish lawyer who coined the term genocide in 1944. That's from his book. If you read that quote, you'll see it describes exactly what's happening to the Palestinian people. I have great praise for Ilan Pappé. His book on the ethnic cleansing of Palestine was a monumental work. It's one of the top 3 books that I refer to when I'm thinking about Palestine. Very detailed, very unsurprisingly readable. And I've come to the conclusion that ethnic cleansing is essentially a euphemism for genocide. I'm going to stop talking. I'm just going to throw that out to the group and see what people's thoughts are. Thank you.
Yes, who would like to, Dr. Azam, Dr. Ang, Prof. Nazari? Okay, Dr. Ang, you'd like to respond first? Yeah, over to you.
Actually, talking about the question of genocide, I think KL is one of the first countries in the world who conducted a tribunal of genocide, Israeli genocide. You see, after the Sabra Shatila massacre, I participated in 5 commissions of inquiry. And in particular, the Sean McBride started by calling it genocide, but under pressure, changed it to crimes against humanity. So, I witnessed the Israeli Kahan Commission and so on and so forth. I've talked myself out. But I think the KL tribunal is the first one who actually conducted a proper tribunal trying Israel for genocide. And it has been concluded. And I just wish that members who organized that should send the findings to you all. Okay, but it's the action that we need. The documentation is there. It's based on what's happened in Gaza, killing families upon families, and Sabra and Shatila killing more than 3,000 defenseless people.
Any of the other panelists wants to respond to that? Okay,
I think Dr. Azam is probably the best person to respond to that question.
Genocide, euphemism, or okay, a description of what's actually happening?
Okay, well, I mean, if what's been happening in Palestine is not genocide, then what's genocide? I mean, Palestinians in 1948, most of the Palestinians were driven out of their land. But what is really interesting about this is not what the Israelis did, but actually what we have documented of what they had been intending to do. The very remarks made by Ben-Gurion and other founding fathers of this Zionist entity, actually they were candid about the fact that they were going to drive the Palestinians out. They did not massacre large numbers of Palestinians in terms of ratios, but the massacres they perpetrated, they intended to be publicized quite well, so that the rest of the Palestinians were horrified and driven to seek shelter elsewhere. And this is what happened to my mother and her family. See, my father is from Hebron, from Al Khalil. My mother was born and raised in Beersheba. When they heard the news of what happened in Deir Yassin and other areas where Zionists entered and massacred everybody indiscriminately, they thought they had no chance of surviving. They had no means of defending themselves. So they sought shelter elsewhere in the hope of coming back. They took their keys with them. They left their belongings inside the houses. Arab governments at the time told them, we will do the job for you. We will finish off the Zionists and then you come back. You can come back in a week or two. But actually, none of the Arab governments at the time was free. They were all part of the remnants of colonialism. It was a conspiracy. It was a conspiracy to enable the Zionists to establish their entity in Palestine. And one of the main tools of Zionism has constantly been wiping out the indigenous population. They're following the example of what happened in America, in the Americas. They're following the example of what happened elsewhere in the world.
Interesting. My next question will be to both Dr. Ang Swee Chai and Dr. Azam Tamimi. This is a question from David Halpin. So he asks, global opinion has been stronger after the last convulsion of killing and maiming, but the mainstream media has swept the issue away once again. What actually motivates the Western leadership, aside from common psychopathy or anything, in always supporting Israel in its habitual racism and criminal actions? So what motivates them actually? And the second part of the question is why especially the Church of England complicit? David Halpin said that he realized that Israel always features the Old Testament, the Amens, the Alleluias, and in the services that he attended. So that's the question. I think that will answer a similar question by James String, who asked that Israel escalated violence will actually embarrass the Jewish diaspora and Zionist supporters to distance themselves from the Zionist project. So please, Dr. Ang and Dr. Azam.
Please go ahead.
Dr. Ang, Swee Chai, you want to answer first?
Dr. Azam, I think I can do the Old Testament part. Okay, but you go first, okay? Thank you.
Okay, thank you. Well, you see, this has very much to do with what was known as the Jewish problem in Europe. Europe had a problem with its Jewish population. They perpetrated crimes against the Jews out of racism, out of different other motivations. And eventually they came to the conclusion, together with a group of secular Jews that the solution to the Jewish problem is to create for them a homeland elsewhere, a homeland that would be safe for them, far away from the pogroms and all the persecution. And initially, the Zionist movement was not acceptable to the Jews. The majority of the Jews rejected it, continued to reject it. But then came the Holocaust. And the Holocaust provided the best justification for the Zionist ideology. The Zionist, I remember once I had a debate with a rabbi in a synagogue in London, in the heart of London, and I was reminding him of the history of Zionism, and he said, "You don't have to tell me all of this. I know it very well. Our old rabbis did not believe in Zionism, but then Hitler came and proved the Zionists to be right." So it was the Holocaust that proved the idea that Europe was not safe for the Jews to be a right idea. And this gives rise to the sense of guilt. Many Europeans feel guilty about this. But there's also an ideological aspect that is to do with Christian Zionism, because Christian Zionists always believed that their Messiah would not come until all the Jews were sent back to Palestine. So there is also this element. But leaving all this aside, politically, Israel today is the last remaining colonial project of the West. They feel it's theirs. It belongs to them. It's their daughter, or it's their spoiled son. And hence is the very special relationship between Europe and America on the one hand, and Israel on the other. So there are a multitude of factors involved here.
Okay, Dr. Ang, want to respond?
Right. You know something, for years and years, I've been teaching Christian Zionism to my Sunday school girls, okay? Joshua fought the Battle of Jericho, David and Goliath, and so on and so forth, that this land is given to the Jews. That time we don't use the word Jews, the chosen people of Israel by God. Okay, I actually, when I think of it, I actually talk like one of the settlers. So when I came back from Sabra and Shatila, I said, my goodness, what on earth is wrong with Christianity? So I have to reread the whole Bible to understand what exactly is in the Bible. And it is a lot of things that has been misunderstood and misquoted. I don't have time to go through it all, but just say that the land belongs to the Jews. That land promise was given to Abraham, okay? And he's the father of the Jews as well as the Arabs. Ibrahim's firstborn son is Ismail, and his second son is Isaac. And God wasn't unfair. God actually promised Ismail that he'll make him a father of many nations, in spite of the fact that Ibrahim or Abraham sent, or Sarah, which is Abraham's Jewish wife, the mother of Jews, that time there's no Jews and nothing like that, into the desert to die twice, right? Anybody who are Christians will know that Hagar or Hajar, the first time she ran away, she was pregnant, and she was in the desert, not sure what to do. You see, and God called her, say, Hajar, what are you doing here? And who are you running away from? Then I'm running away from my mistress. And God said, no, I hear you. I hear you. You're with a child. Go back. Go back. And although you have to submit to the cruelty of your mistress, I will be with you and protect your child. Now that was in the Old Testament, which I never taught. I always taught my girls that, you know, the land belonged to Israel, you know, and so on and so forth. God has chosen the Israeli people and this and that. But I didn't read this part, but it was all in the Bible. And the second time is when Sarah forced Ibrahim to send, this time is Ismail, he's about maybe 13 years old, and his mother to go into the desert with only one bag of water to die. You all know that. It's in the Quran, right? And she put the boy under a tree and cried out to God. And what did God do? God opened a fountain for them to drink, and Ishmael becomes a very strong leader of all the tribes. In fact, if you read on the Bible, the whole of the Bedouins and the Negev and the southern belt all actually are land granted directly by God to Ishmael. And the third thing is also the granting of the land to the Jews or to Abraham is conditional on one thing, because God says, walk thou before me and be thou perfect, and I'll make you an everlasting covenant. So there are three parts to the covenant. One is that Abraham will be a great father of the tribes, right? But the most important third covenant is that through him, all nations will be blessed. Now, this one is controversial because we believe that Jesus, the Messiah, actually came from Ishmael, came from Isaac, but it is open to everybody as a blessing from God. So there's no possessiveness. You see, I think in the covenant in the Old Testament, is God does not make a covenant carte blanche. There's always a condition. Walk thou before me and be thou perfect. And about the covenant of Messiah, he says that because you offer your son to me, I will offer my son to the world. You see, so if you read, I think it's also in the Quran, because I always talk to my Palestinian friends, is it true? Is it the Quran as well? And they say yes. So really, there's no argument for it, okay? And genocide and killing and claiming and expelling people is an invention of the political Zionist Israel. It is nothing to do with the Israel of the Old Testament. In the Old Testament, Israel refers to the 12 tribes who are the children of Jacob. And Ishmael also have a lot of children, and his children also have a lot of tribes. So those were the days. So I read it again and again and again. I can find nothing to say that, this land belongs to you forever. It belongs to both. And the seed of Abraham, in Hebrew, seed is not a plural word, not a singular word. Seed means the seed, children, which means Ishmael, Isaac, and the other children of Abraham later on. I mean, it's a very short take. I don't want to start theology going on. I can go on for hours.
Okay. All right. Can I just read the last three questions here, and then we allow any of the panelists to actually respond. So there's one question about BDS by Joseph O'Neill again. We boycotted all of apartheid South Africa, not just the Bantustans. Why are we not boycotting the whole of the genocidal Jewish state? And I think this question will be best answered by Prof. Nazari, and probably Prof can update the boycott movement in Malaysia and so on and so forth. And the next two questions, what are your thoughts on the new Israeli PM, Naftali Bennett, and what further effects do you foresee on the current situation in Palestine with the coming position? And the one thing that I'm interested as well is another question about Israel Shah, about the religious ideology underlying the genocide in Palestine. So do we need to revisit, and what is your opinion on this? Okay, all right. Probably we start with Prof. Nazari first.
Okay, thank you very much. The other questions will require a lot of time, so I will just be very, very brief. The question is, should we boycott the whole of historic Palestine under the control of the Israelis, the Zionists now? Yes. We in Malaysia, the BDS Malaysia has got the stance that we boycott the whole of Israel. We don't say that we only boycott companies that only operate in the settlements. That is the stance of the Americans movements, also the Europeans, because they start from a more difficult basis. For our basis, we start from a higher basis. We don't have any relationship with Israel. Malaysia does not have any relationship with Israel, and we do not recognize the state of Israel. And therefore, we do not condone any relationship with the illegal state of Israel. So any products that come from Israel are not, we call Malaysians to boycott completely. So it's not only boycotting companies that operate in the West Bank or occupied territories, but we boycott any Israeli company, any Israeli institution. So I hope that is very clear as far as BDS Malaysia is concerned. Of course, we also want to call Malaysians to work harder, because many Malaysians are not aware of the issue of Palestine and are not aware of the apartheid nature. And as you can see from the survey that you did at the beginning, people are still talking about the two-state solution. They don't understand Zionism. If they talk about the two-state solution, they don't understand the nature of Zionism. That the Zionists came to take off everything, right? They, as you know, as we are witnessing now. So if you are talking about that, you are being very naive, as if you do not know that, including the West Bank. So Malaysians have got to understand the nature of Zionism and the nature of the apartheid nature of the state of Israel. Thank you very much. And the rest, I'll leave it to the rest of the panelists. Thank you.
Okay, Dr. Ang or Dr. Azam, any respond?
Well, regarding Bennett, as far as the Palestinians are concerned, I don't know whether he is worse or the same as Netanyahu. It will make no difference. In the political spectrum within Israel, he is further on the right. That's how they would classify him. But like Netanyahu, I believe he is only an opportunist. Of course, he's involved with the settler movement. He's been a leader of the settlers. But these politicians are all about their own self-esteem and their own empowerment. Whether it is Netanyahu or Bennett or Yair Lapid or whoever it was in the past or in the future, the only way to get them to recognize Palestinian rights is through struggle. If we are weak, if we give in, they will be encouraged to take more, because that's what it is about. Now they are so careful now, they are a lot more careful now in dealing with Jerusalem, simply because there is a threat of action from the resistance in Gaza. Had there been no such threat, they would have done the unthinkable. Yes, there are differences among themselves. They compete among themselves for power, for more power. But when it comes to the Palestinians, they are all Zionists and they all want the Palestinians out.
Good.
I just want to say something. If somebody wants to say something, I've said enough. But I think at this juncture, it's quite important that a lot of knowledge is good, okay? But at this time, I think we have to take stock as to what we can do as an international community. Okay, there are very few things we have in our hands. Like me, for instance, I'm completely useless to Gaza because I've been deported 3 times, in prison twice. I cannot get into Gaza. But what can I do? Okay, Professor Ismail has talked about BDS. And I think it's so important that, you know, this is something which we should work at. That's the only thing we have in a powerful way. Number 2 is advocacy in the international scene. We just have to do it, no matter what they do. I think some of you already know Jewish Chronicle wrote something really wild and horrible about me. You know, the president of the Jewish Medical Association trying to associate me with the Protocols of Zion, which I don't even know what it is. But I think I'm going to read it now that you mentioned it. So we get all these thrown at us, but we have to speak up. You see, the Palestinians are paying with their life. Gaza, in order to defend Jerusalem, has invited this 11 days of concrete bombardment. It has been cancelled by the IDF. The children have their toys, they cannot play with it because they're dead. Right? The doctors are killed. You know, Shifa Hospital, all the roads to Shifa Hospital has been bombed so that the wounded has to be carried physically into the hospital. So this is the reality in Gaza. And also, you think of the 6 million Palestinians living in refugee camps. We must not forget them. There must be they must be included every time we talk about Palestine, so that they will remember that they know, but we have to remind ourselves that we know that they are part of Palestine. So these are our duties, okay? Just to do it. And in Malaysia, I think it's not easy because, you know, you open your mouth and say, oh yeah, you know, Dr. Sui, she spoke to Malaysians, the anti-Semitic country. Who cares, you know? I think it's wonderful that, you know, you have a strong BDS campaign. I just wish we can have one like that in the UK. But right now, I'm saying some of our colleagues are actually, you know, picketing a lot of Israeli infrastructures like arms and so on and so forth. It is very difficult, but we will do it. And we'll look at it this way. You know, the Palestinians are there, they're steadfast, they're strong, you know. So we draw our inspiration from them. And we do not do anything without putting them in front of us. So every time I do something, I have in my mind Palestinian children, you know, standing unafraid, you know, ready to give up their lives for justice for their country. So that is our inspiration.
Thank you, Dr. Ang Sui Chan. It's very, very interesting and it's very important as well. I think time is against us. So, but what we'll do is we'll allow 2 or 3 minutes to all panelists to just say their final thoughts, final rambling or important points for all the participants to carry forward. And then we'll end with Dr. Lai. So probably we'll start with Prof. Nazari and then Dr. Azam and last statement by Dr. Ang Sui Chan, and then I'll back to Dr. Lai. Yeah. Yep, Prof. Nazari. Please.
Thank you very much. Very brief. Malaysians have been talking about Palestine for many, many years, flying the Palestine flag and then demonstrating. That is not enough. We have to go beyond that. Not collecting money to give to Palestinians. That is not enough. We have to go beyond that. We have to start calling the international community. The Malaysian government has got to be more serious to spearhead the international community to recognize Israel as an apartheid state and to boycott it completely. We want Israel to be treated like South Africa was treated. In other words, they shouldn't be at the Olympic. They shouldn't be at the World Cup. They shouldn't be allowed to join any of the international platform. By right, Malaysia should not join any functions where Israel is there. We should boycott any functions where Israel has been accepted, like the Olympic, for example, right? That's how the international community treated South Africa, and we should be doing exactly the same thing, because what is happening in Palestine is worse than what happened in South Africa. So we have to step up higher and not just come up with slogans. Slogans are not enough. We have to act on our words. Thank you.
Thank you, Prof. Nazari. Dr. Azam.
Well, I just want to thank you all for organizing this, and just want to say that this is a long-term struggle. We need to be ready to continue with resolve. But I have a good feeling about this. These days, I feel that the atmosphere is similar to the late 80s, just before a breakthrough was reached in South Africa. So I'm really optimistic that we are getting there.
Okay, Dr. Ang, last parting statements. Oh, you're still muted, Dr. Ang.
Okay, right. I've said a lot already. Okay, I share with Dr. Tamimi. I'm optimistic too. Even in the worst of time, I'm optimistic because, alhamdulillah, the Palestinians are very strong people. That is the main thing. During my darkest moments, my Palestinian friends, they don't cry. Alhamdulillah, we are strong people. You take care of yourself. Now, what do you think? Eh? So it's something so wonderful that, it gives us hope. And our hope is because of their hope.
Dr. Lai, I leave the floor to you.
On behalf of the organizing committee, that is the Academic Staff Association of University Malaya, the Academic Staff Association of IIUM, and also BDS, I would like to thank you all the esteemed panelists for their insights. Prof. Ilan, who has left just now, and Afas, Dr. Ang, Dr. Azam, and also Prof. Nazari. I definitely have learned a lot from all of you, and I hope the audiences has too. And I hope from here on, we will continue to support, to act in Prof. Nazari's phrase, to continue to act in support, whether either as an individual or collectively, for the quest, for the cause, for the Palestinian cause to, to liberate themselves. Yeah. Okay. Thank you so much. And once again, our deepest appreciation to all the esteemed panelists.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you everyone for attending, and we'll see you again. This recording will be live on IIM official YouTube and also BDS Malaysia Facebook as well. So please do view again. Okay. Assalamualaikum and good evening. Assalamualaikum, everyone.
Shukran.
Bye.
Thank you all.